The morning mist had not yet lifted when she first appeared. She came on foot, carrying nothing but a worn canvas bag slung over one shoulder and a quiet that felt out of place, the kind of quiet that belongs to someone carrying a secret too heavy for ordinary shoulders. The dirt road into Okafor village was narrow and uneven, lined on both sides with cassava farms and the smell of burning wood from kitchens already alive before sunrise. And yet, among all the movement, all the smoke, all the noise of a village waking up, she moved like a woman walking into something, not away from it. Nobody knew her name yet. Nobody cared to ask. What they saw was simple, a woman. Alone. No car. No luggage. No man by her side. Arriving in a village where strangers were noticed the way a wrong note is noticed in a familiar song, immediately, sharply, and with judgment already forming before the last echo fades. Old Mama Chidima was the first to spot her from across the road. She squinted, sucked her teeth, and leaned toward her neighbor. You see that one? Her neighbor looked up from her bowl of groundnuts. Which one? That woman. Coming from the East Road. She doesn't look like she's from anywhere near here. Maybe she's lost. Maybe, Mama Chidima said, watching with narrowed eyes. Or maybe she's trouble. She was neither. But she was about to become the most talked about person in Okafor village. And before her story was over, she would teach every single soul in that place a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. A lesson about what it means to truly see a person. A lesson about the difference between looking and understanding. A lesson that would cost some people their pride, and would give one quiet, unassuming man something he never expected. Her name was Emma Ose. And she was worth over $3 billion. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. But no one knew that yet. She rented the smallest, most rundown plot of land at the edge of the village. A crumbling structure with a leaking roof and a front yard overtaken by weeds. The kind of place that had been empty for 2 years because even the poorest families in the village considered it beneath them. She paid for 3 months with cash, a modest amount, 1 note folded neatly in a simple envelope, and asked for nothing extra. No help moving in. No neighbors to show her around. She carried the few things she'd brought, set them inside the bare rooms, and by evening, she had swept the yard and planted the beginning of a garden. The village had already started talking before she finished sweeping. By the next morning, she was at the communal farm plot, a shared stretch of land near the eastern boundary where villagers with no private farmland could work for a share of the harvest. She arrived before most people, tied her hair up, pulled on a pair of old work gloves, and began to dig. It was here that the 3 men first noticed her. Chokudi was the loudest of them. A broad-shouldered man in his early 30s who had an opinion about everything and a tendency to make sure everyone within earshot heard it. He was known in the village for 2 things, his laughter, which was frequent, and his cruelty, which was casual, the kind that doesn't think of itself as cruelty at all, only humor. Beside him stood Emeka, who was quieter but no less mean, and Taiwo, the youngest, who mostly laughed at whatever the other 2 said because it was easier than thinking for himself. The 3 of them were leaning against a fence post near the farm when they first saw Emma walking. Chokudi watched her for a moment. Then he laughed. Look at her, he said. Holding that hole like it's her first time seeing one. Emeka squinted. She's going to destroy those seedlings. She already did, Taiwo said, pointing. See that row? Too deep. Everything there will rot. Chokudi called out to her across the field. Hey. New woman. You know what you're doing, or are you just making art with the soil? Emma didn't look up. She continued digging, adjusted her row spacing, and moved to the next line. This seemed to irritate Chokudi more than if she had responded. She's ignoring us, Emeka said, amused. Let her, Chokudi said. She won't last a week. City hands don't survive village soil. They laughed again and walked away. But Emma had heard every word. She had heard worse. In boardrooms where men twice Chokudi's age had underestimated her. In corporate meetings where she had walked in and watched every face in the room decide within seconds, that she was less than she was. She had heard dismissal dressed up as humor her entire career. It didn't move her. What moved her was why she was here. To understand Emma Osei, you have to understand what it means to build something extraordinary and still feel completely empty inside. She had grown up in modest circumstances, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress in Accra, Ghana. From childhood, she had understood money as a language, something that opened doors, that shifted the way people looked at you, that could transform the story you were born into. She had studied economics, worked herself through university without financial support from anyone, and at 26, had started her first company, a small logistics firm that moved goods across West African borders. Within 4 years, it was one of the fastest growing freight companies in the region. By 32, she had diversified into real estate, technology, and agribusiness. Her face appeared on the covers of business magazines. Her name was spoken in rooms of serious power. She was what people called, in that tone that is equal parts admiration and distance, a self-made woman. But here is what the magazine covers never said. They never said that she had been engaged twice. The first man disappeared quietly when the business was still small, telling mutual friends that Emma was too driven and not ready to be a wife. The second was more sophisticated. He stayed through 4 years of the relationship's growth, right alongside her financial success, and proposed the same month she signed her largest deal. She wore the ring for 11 months before she discovered, through a conversation she was never meant to hear, that he had calculated the exact timeline of their relationship against the trajectory of her wealth. He had not loved her. He had invested in her. She ended the engagement without drama. Returned the ring in a small box with a short note that said only, "I hope you find what you are actually looking for." After that, she dated carefully. Briefly. Always with one eye watching for the moment when the person across the table stopped seeing her and started seeing her net worth. It always came. It always came in a small, almost invisible moment, a comment about her properties, a question about her inheritance plans, a look in the eye when she mentioned a new investment, and when it came, something in her chest would close quietly, like a window being shut before a storm. She was 38 years old, wildly successful, and profoundly lonely. And she had a theory. The theory was this: wealth had become a wall around her. Not a wall that kept the world out, quite the opposite. It was a wall that kept the right people away and invited the wrong ones in. If she could stand somewhere without her name, without her money, without her reputation, just as a human being, she might finally be able to see whether anyone could love her for exactly what she was. So she picked a village in Nigeria, far from Ghana, far from her network, far from anyone who might recognize her face. She arranged for her trusted chief of staff, a woman named Adis, to manage everything in her absence. She gave herself 3 months. She packed as little as possible, wore the simplest clothes she owned, and walked into Okafor village like a person with nothing. Because for the first time in 15 years, she wanted to know what it felt like to be nobody. The second week was harder than the first. The physical labor was punishing in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Her palms blistered through the gloves. Her back ached with a deep, specific soreness that no amount of stretching seemed to ease. She woke before 5 every morning, worked until the sun was too high to ignore, rested briefly, and worked again in the late afternoon. The village watched. They always watched. Women at the water point would stop their conversations when Emma approached, then resume them slightly louder when she was near enough to hear. She caught fragments. She doesn't even know how to carry a bucket properly. Who is she? Where is her husband? Where is her family? A woman alone here. Something is wrong with her. The questions didn't bother her. She had expected them. What she hadn't expected was the children. They were the only ones who approached her without agenda. A group of 4, the youngest maybe 5 years old, the oldest perhaps 10, who appeared at her fence one afternoon and watched her garden with unguarded curiosity. "What are you planting?" the oldest one asked. "Vegetables," Emma said. "Tomatoes. Spinach. And some okra at the back." "Why?" "Because I'm hungry," she said simply, and the children laughed as though she'd said something both funny and deeply obvious. After that, they came back every few days. She kept sweets in a tin near the door, a small indulgence she allowed herself, and the children seemed to understand this without being told. She never offered. They never asked. But the tin was always slightly emptier by the time they left, and Emma smiled each time she noticed. These small moments were holding her together, because the rest of it was grinding her down. The third week, she made a mistake with the communal farm rotation. She had worked a section that was assigned to another family for that cycle, unknowingly undoing their planting arrangement. The family, a woman named Ngozi and her husband Bello, confronted her at the farm in front of others. Bello was not violent, but he was loud, and in his loudness, he said things that were designed to wound. This is what happens when people come from nowhere. No sense. No respect for order. You think because you are new, the rules don't apply to you. Emma stood still. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. I didn't know about the rotation. I apologize. I replant what I disturbed. You can't replant what's already damaged, Bello snapped. Then I compensate you for the loss, she said. There was a pause. Something flickered in Bello's face, not softening, exactly, but a slight recalibration. He hadn't expected that answer. Just stay away from our section, he said finally, and walked away. Ngozi lingered for a moment. Her expression was harder to read, less anger in it, more something like curiosity. She looked at Emma for a long moment, said nothing, and followed her husband. From the edge of the crowd that had gathered, Chukwudi's voice rose with the predictable commentary. She can't even figure out a farm rotation. What exactly is she doing here? Laughter. Emma picked up her hoe and went back to work. It was in that same crowd, hanging slightly back from the noise, that she first properly noticed David. She had seen him before, a quiet presence at the periphery of village life. He was tall, lean in the way of someone who worked physically without thinking about it, with a face that was difficult to age, somewhere between 30 and 35, she guessed. He had an observant quality about him. He watched things. Not with the hungry, judging watchfulness of Chukwudi and his companions, but with the kind of patient attention that belongs to people who understand that most things reveal themselves if you simply wait long enough. When Bello had finished his confrontation and the crowd began to drift, David had not laughed. He had not commented. He had simply watched the whole scene with an expression that she couldn't easily categorize, not pity, not indifference. Something quieter than both. A few days later, he appeared at the communal farm the same time she did. They walked in silence for almost an hour, on separate rows, before he spoke. You're spacing the tomatoes too close together. She looked up. They'll compete for water, he continued, not looking at her, continuing to walk his own row. Give them at least a meter apart. More if the soil is dry. She looked at her row. He was right. Thank you, she said. He nodded, still not looking up. They finished the morning in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the one the rest of the village offered. The village's silence around her was loaded, thick with assessment, with gossip being stored up, with judgment being quietly assembled. His silence was simply what it was. The absence of noise. Nothing more. She found herself thinking about it later that evening, sitting in her crumbling little house with a candle burning low and the sound of crickets filling the dark. What a strange thing, she thought, to feel more comfortable in someone's silence than in most people's words. The weeks passed. Emma settled into a rhythm that was at once exhausting and clarifying. She learned the village. She learned who was generous and who was strategic about their generosity. She learned which smiles were genuine and which were the kind that people deploy when they want something. She learned which conversations were invitations and which were interrogations dressed as friendliness. She helped a young mother carry firewood when she saw her struggling under the weight of it. The woman thanked her and asked no questions, which Emma appreciated. She helped Mama Chidinma, who had been the first to judge her, repair a section of her garden fence that had collapsed after a rainstorm. The old woman said little during the work, but when they finished, she handed Emma a small wrapped parcel. Bean cake, she said gruffly. From this morning. It was an offering that cost the woman nothing in money and everything in pride. Emma accepted it with both hands and ate every bite. She was being seen, slowly, in fragments. Not fully. Not completely. But in pieces. David continued to appear at the farm in the mornings. Their conversations were sparse but consistent, a sentence here, a correction there, a question occasionally. He told her once, without looking up from his work, that the variety of spinach she'd planted did poorly in that region's dry season and that she should consider swapping half the bed for waterleaf. "How do you know so much about it?" she asked. "My father farmed this land for 40 years, he said. "I grew up in these rows." "Do you still farm here full-time?" A pause. "I teach at the secondary school," he said. "Literature and civic education. I farm in the mornings because it centers me." She processed this quietly. "What does it center you for?" she asked. He thought about it for a moment. "The world gets loud," he said finally. "The farm is where I remember that most things are simpler than we make them." She looked at him then. He was still looking at the soil. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly it." It was Chukwudi who first tried to use her. He arrived one afternoon with a different energy. The laughter was still there, but it had been repositioned. He was smiling in a way that suggested effort. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning against the fence of her small yard, "that we started off badly. And that was unfair of me." Emma continued weeding her garden without looking up. "Is that an apology?" she asked. "It's an acknowledgement," he said smoothly. "You've worked hard. I respect that. I wanted to come say it." She sat back on her heels and looked at him directly. It was the kind of look that had, in boardrooms across the continent, made seasoned executives shift in their chairs. Chukwudi did not know this. He smiled more broadly. "What do you want?" she asked. The smile faltered slightly. "Nothing. I just—" "You want something," she said calmly. "What is it?" "A bit." Then he laughed, his old laugh, less performed. "There's a business opportunity," he began. "A small trading arrangement. I need someone to front a portion of the capital. Not much. I thought maybe you—" "I don't have money," she said. "I heard you compensated Bello for the farm." "That was a small amount. I don't have money for business ventures." Chukwudi looked at her for a long moment. The smile was entirely gone now. "Right," he said. He pushed off the fence and left without another word. Emma went back to her weeding. She was not angry. She had expected this. She had seen it more times than she could count, people reading the surface of another person and calculating what they might extract. Chukwudi was not complicated. He was simply a person who saw the world as a series of transactions, and who had decided to apply that framework to her now that mockery had failed to produce anything interesting. What she had not expected was what happened 3 days later. There was a gathering at the community square, a celebration for a family whose son had been admitted to university. The whole village came. Food was shared, music played, children ran between adults' legs, and the evening had that loose, generous quality that comes when a community feels genuinely happy about something. Emma attended because Mama Chidima had, in a gruff and indirect way, told her she should. "You sit in that broken house every evening," the old woman had said. "Come and remember that people are not only judgment." It was, Emma thought, one of the most profound things she'd heard in months. At the gathering, she sat at the edge of things, comfortable in her observer's position, watching. David was there, seated with a group of older men, listening more than talking, laughing when something struck him as genuinely funny rather than laughing reflexively at everything the way Chukwudi did. Chukwudi was also there. And somewhere in the middle of the evening, emboldened by palm wine and the collective attention of his small audience, he shifted from harmless social performance into something uglier. He had been talking about Emma to the people around him. She caught fragments across the square, building a story about her that was meant to entertain. She heard the words, "doesn't belong," and "thinks she's special," and then a phrase that carried clearly across the noise, "no man, no money, no future," and still she walks around like she has something. laughter from the small group. Emma sat very still. This was the kind of moment she had learned, over years, to move through without showing damage. You learn it in boardrooms too, the passing cruelty, the casual dismissal, the joke that is really a weapon with a painted smile. You learn to receive it without flinching and to keep your face composed, because showing the wound only extended the entertainment. But something about this particular moment, the warmth of the gathering, the openness she had allowed herself over these weeks, the lowering of walls she had worked hard to lower, meant that it landed differently. Not with rage. With a specific, quiet hurt. She was gathering herself to leave quietly when she heard David's voice. It was not raised. It did not have to be. Chukwudi, he said. Just the name. Clear, direct. The small group turned. David looked at Chukwudi with an expression that was entirely without heat, which somehow made it more serious. A man who needs to diminish others to feel large, he said, has already told you everything about the size of his life. Silence. Chukwudi opened his mouth. Respect, David continued, is not something you wear to occasions. It's something you carry in how you treat people when there's nothing to gain from it. The gathering had gone quiet. Not entirely, music still played somewhere at the back, but the immediate circle had heard it, and the quality of the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people recognizing truth. Chukwudi said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not make things worse, and even he seemed to understand this. David turned back to his conversation with the older men, calmly, as though he had simply said what needed saying and saw no reason to perform further. Across the square, Emma stood very still. She had been defended before. She had been defended by lawyers, by public relations teams, by corporate allies whose defense was motivated by their own interests. She had never been defended by someone who gained absolutely nothing from doing it, in front of a crowd where taking the unpopular position cost something. She looked at David. He wasn't looking at her. He was listening to one of the older men again, leaning forward slightly, nodding at something being said. She sat back down. She was not leaving. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in Okafor Village's relationship with Emma, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that things shift when a community recalibrates its story about someone. Mama Chidima started greeting her by name in the mornings. Ngozi, Bello's wife, stopped one day to look at Emma's garden and said, without much preamble, "Your tomatoes are coming up well." Bello himself nodded at her on the road once, which in the economy of village respect was a significant gesture. The children were still her most consistent visitors. The oldest one, a bright, serious girl named Amara, had taken to asking Emma questions that had the quality of examination. "Are you from a city?" Amara asked one day. "Yes," Emma said. "Why did you come here then?" "Cities are better." Emma considered the question. "Better in some ways," she said. "But this place has things the city doesn't." "Like what?" "Quiet," Emma said. "And people who are exactly what they seem." Amara thought about this. "Some people here are not what they seem," she said, with the certainty of a child who has been paying attention to adults. Emma looked at the girl. "You're right," she said. "I should have said, this place has the possibility of finding people who are." David, meanwhile, had become a quiet constant in her days. They developed a rhythm that neither of them named. She learned that he had grown up in this village, gone to university in Lagos on a scholarship, studied literature because it was, as he told her once, the only subject that takes human beings seriously as subjects rather than variables, and returned because the village needed a teacher who understood something beyond the village. "Didn't you want to stay in Lagos?" she asked him one morning at the farm. "I wanted to," he said. "I thought about it for a while. But wanting something and deciding it's what you should do are different things." "What made you decide?" He paused in his work. "I came back for a holiday and taught a class for a week as a favor while the teacher was sick. There was a boy in the third row who was bright, genuinely bright in a way that happens maybe once in a generation. And he had no one to tell him that. I thought, if I leave, Maybe someone else will notice him. But maybe they won't. He shrugged. That was enough reason. Did he go on to do something? David smiled, a real smile, not performed. He's studying engineering in Abuja. First person from his family to leave the village for university. Emma looked at him. He had returned his attention to his role, unself-conscious. That's a remarkable thing, she said quietly. It's just being present, he said simply. She thought about this for the rest of the day. The month that everything changed began simply, with an afternoon rainstorm that caught most of the village unprepared. Emma was at the far end of the communal farm when the rain hit, sudden and heavy, the kind that arrives without the usual preliminary darkening of sky. She ran for the closest shelter, which turned out to be the same overhang of the old storage shed that David had ducked under seconds before her. They stood together in the noise of the rain, watching the field flood in rapid, spreading sheets. For a while, neither spoke. The rain was too loud for easy conversation anyway. Then David said, "How long are you planning to stay?" She didn't answer immediately. It was the question she had been turning over herself for weeks. "I came for 3 months, she said finally. "That's almost done," he said. "Yes." He nodded. He didn't ask what came after. She noticed this, the deliberate non-asking. Most people would have followed the thread, "Where will you go? What will you do? What are you returning to?" He simply acknowledged it and left the space open. "This place has been strange for me," she said. "Strange in a way I needed." "In what way?" She thought about how to answer honestly without answering completely. "In a way that reminded me what things feel like when they are real," she said. "When people's reactions to you are based on what they see rather than what they've been told." He was quiet for a moment. "Most people are not cruel because they intend to be," he said. "They are cruel because they are lazy. It takes effort to see past surface things. Most people don't make that effort." "You do," she said. He looked at her. It was the first time in weeks of conversations that something like surprise crossed his face. "I try," he said carefully. "I don't always succeed." The rain was easing. The field outside was a shallow lake, the young plants invisible beneath it. "Your tomatoes will be fine," he said. "That variety handles flood. But the okra at the back, you should check the drainage channel before sunset." She laughed. It came out before she could decide whether to let it, a genuine, full laugh, without calculation. He looked at her with that quiet, attentive expression. "What?" he said, but not with offense. With curiosity. "I say something honest and vulnerable," she said, still smiling, "and your instinct is to immediately give me practical farming advice." "The okra is genuinely at risk," he said, but there was something in his voice, not quite humor, but adjacent to it, that told her he understood exactly what she was saying. "Thank you," she said. "For the okra advice and for everything else." He nodded. He didn't ask what she meant by everything else. He seemed to already know, or to be patient enough to not need to know immediately. The rain stopped. They stepped out into the after-rain stillness, and Emma went to check her drainage channel, and the evening was the kind of evening that feels quietly significant without announcing itself. It was 3 days before her 3 months ended when Chekudi made his final, most damaging move. He had not confronted Emma since the gathering. He had recalibrated, as people like him do, retreated not out of genuine change but out of strategic patience. Emma knew the type. She had spent 15 years navigating them. But she had let her guard down in Okafor village, because she had wanted to, because that was the point of being here, and so when the blow came, she was not fully braced for it. There was a community meeting at the village hall, a regular assembly where disputes and matters of communal concern were aired. Emma attended because she had been formally invited by the community head, which she understood as a modest integration into village life. Chekudi stood up near the end of the meeting and, with the calculated ease of someone who has been preparing this, addressed the room. "There is a matter I think we should discuss," he said. "About the woman who has joined us." Emma. All heads turned. Emma sat very still. "I want to raise a concern," Chekudi continued, his voice carrying the tone of a man performing civic duty. We don't know where this woman comes from. We don't know her background. She appeared with nothing, takes from the communal farm, takes from our resources, and we have simply accepted her. In these times, we must be careful about who we bring into our community. I am not accusing her of anything. I am simply asking, who is she, really? There was a mama in the room. Emma felt something cold and sharp in her chest. Not anger. Something closer to exhaustion. She had heard versions of this, who is she, really? In boardrooms, in social circles, in the press. It was always the same. The question dressed up as concern but functioning as attack. She was about to speak, calmly, carefully, when David stood. I'll answer that, he said. Chokudi turned, surprised. Emma, David said, addressing the room while looking at her, is a person who arrived here with nothing, asked for nothing she was not willing to work for, has shown more dignity in this village under mockery and dismissal than most of us show in comfort. If we are asking who people really are, then I suggest we extend that question equally to everyone in this room. He paused. Including the person who raised it. The room was silent. Chokudi's jaw tightened. David sat down. Emma met his eyes for a moment. She said nothing. Neither did he. But something in the brief exchange carried more weight than most conversations carry in a lifetime. The community had cleared his throat. The meeting is adjourned, he said. She almost told him that night. She sat in her little house with the candle burning and the cricket noise filling the dark, and she thought, he defended me twice. He has nothing to gain. He does not know who I am. He sees me, just me, and finds me worth something. She thought about how easy it would be to tell him. She had a phone, the first time she'd considered using it for anything other than Adi's brief daily check-in. She could call her people. They would be here within hours. The SUVs, the staff, the whole enormous reality of who she was would roll into this village and the test would be over. But she didn't call. Because for the first time in 15 years, she was not ready for the test to be over. She wanted one more morning at the farm. One more rain under the storage shed overhang. One more conversation in which she was simply Emma, without the weight of everything else attached. She allowed herself that. If you're still watching up to now, type I am still here in the comment section. This story is far from over. On the morning of her final day, she rose at 4 and went to the farm alone. She walked her rows in the dark, in the familiar pre-dawn quiet, doing what had become, over 3 months, something like a ritual. The physical repetition of it, the turning of soil, the careful placement of seeds, the slow attentiveness that farming demanded, had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing. It had given her presence. The kind of presence that her real life, with its schedules and meetings and strategic decisions, had steadily eaten away. She was still working when she heard the first engine. Then another. Then another. The sound grew, a low, approaching rumble from the main road into the village. She straightened up, soil on her gloves, and turned. 3 large black SUVs rolled into Okafor village just as the sun broke over the tree line. They moved slowly, the way vehicles move when they are trying to be respectful of a space smaller than they are built for. They stopped at the village's central point and sat for a moment with engines idling. The village noticed immediately. That kind of entrance could not be unnoticed. Doors opened, faces appeared at windows, the early morning crowd at the water point fell silent. Men in dark suits stepped out of the vehicles. 4 of them. They stood in a row and looked around, and then one of them, Adis, Emma's chief of staff, straight-backed and calm in her way that allowed no ambiguity about authority, walked directly across the village toward the communal farm. The crowd that had gathered followed at a distance. Adis walked to Emma. Emma had not moved. She stood with her hoe and her dirty gloves at the edge of her row, and she looked at Adis, and something passed between them that could only be understood by 2 people who had shared years of enormous work together. The board meeting is Wednesday, Adis said simply. You asked for 3 months. It's been 3 months and 2 days. I know, Emma said. Everything is ready. The team is in the vehicles. We can leave whenever you're prepared. Emma looked around the farm. She looked at her rows, the tomatoes that had come up well, the okra that had survived the flood, the spinach she had replanted twice before getting the spacing right. 3 months of work in a 20-meter plot that would have taken her real employees about 45 minutes to have professionally planted. She looked up. The crowd had gathered at the edge of the farm. Mama Chidima, Ngozi, Bello, the children, Amara, Chokudi, Emeka, Taiwo, and David, standing slightly apart from the rest, watching, not with shock, not with the open-mouthed disbelief that had taken over most of the other faces, but with the same quiet, attentive expression he brought to everything. Emma removed her gloves. She folded them carefully. She walked to the edge of the farm and addressed the crowd. Her voice carried without effort, a voice built over 15 years of rooms that required it. My name is Emma Osei, she said. I own the Osei Group, logistics, real estate, technology, and agribusiness operations across 9 African countries. I am worth, as of last quarter's valuation, $3.2 billion US. Absolute silence. She watched the faces move through their recalibrations. Shock. Disbelief. The rapid, frantic reordering of everything they had thought about her. And in some faces, in Chokudi's face especially, she watched something complicated move through. She had seen it before. It was the specific expression of a person realizing that their behavior has been witnessed by someone whose opinion will now cost them something. I came here, she continued, not to observe you or to judge you. I came here because I needed to remember who I was when money had no voice in the conversation. I needed to know if I could still be a person, just a person, and be received as one. She paused. Some of you treated me with cruelty. Some of you treated me with indifference. Some of you treated me with the gradual, hard-won warmth that is the most honest kind, because it took time. I am grateful for all of it. Every version of it taught me something. She turned slightly. And one of you treated me, from the beginning, the way every human being deserves to be treated, with quiet, uncomplicated dignity. Without agenda. Without the need for anything in return. David had not moved. His expression had changed only slightly. There was something in it now, a careful, private attention. Emma stepped away from the crowd. She walked toward him. Chukudi moved first. He stepped forward, his voice emerging smoothly, transformed into something warmer and more urgent than it had ever been when she was nobody. Emma, Madam Emma, please, you must understand, I have always respected you, I was simply. She walked past him. Emeka tried next. We were just joking, we never meant. She walked past him. She stood in front of David. He was looking at her. Calm. Present. No desperation. No sudden recalibration. His face was the same face it had always been. You should know, he said, quietly, that this changes nothing about my opinion of you. She felt something in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. It was not a performance, and it was not strategy, and it had nothing to do with money. It was something much older and simpler than any of that. I came here, she said, to find someone who could see me before they knew the truth. And you, she paused, you saw me. Before any of this. He held her gaze. I saw you arguing with the soil over tomato spacing, he said. And deciding the soil was wrong. She laughed, that same unguarded laugh, in front of all these people, and she did not care even slightly. The soil was wrong, she said. It usually is, he said. Behind them, the crowd stood in stunned silence. Adi stood at a respectful distance, professionally impassive. The children, Amora at the front, watched with wide eyes and the specific intensity of people who understand that they are watching something important even if they cannot fully name what it is. Emma looked at David. He looked back at her. And something that had been building in the quiet mornings and the rain-shelter conversations and the brief exchanges that carried more weight than they announced, something settled. I have a board meeting Wednesday, she said. Wednesday, he said, processing. I'll be back Thursday. He was quiet for a moment. Something in his face moved in a way that was subtle and entirely serious. The okra will need attention by Thursday, he said. I know, she said. I'll be here. The SUVs left Okafor village that morning with Emma Ose inside them. She sat in the back of the lead vehicle looking out at the passing landscape, the cassava farms, the red dirt roads, the villages giving way to highways, the highways giving way to the city skyline rising in the distance. Adis sat across from her, laptop open, briefing her on what had accumulated in 92 days. Emma listened. She asked questions. Her mind moved back into the familiar architecture of strategy and decision, and the transition was easier than she had expected, because she was bringing something with her that she hadn't had when she left. She was bringing the knowledge that the war had a door in it. In Okafor village, the conversation lasted for weeks. It reshaped things in the way that only genuine surprise can reshape a community, not just in its surface arrangements but in something deeper, something about how people thought about the faces they saw every day. Chokudi was quieter after that morning. Not changed, people like Chokudi do not change quickly, but quieter. There was something it was harder to be after you had mocked a billionaire to her face and she had walked past your apology to choose someone else. The experience had the quality of a mirror, and some truths, once seen, cannot be fully unseen. Mama Chidima told anyone who would listen that she had always known Emma was special. From the first day, she said firmly. I said it to myself, this woman has something. This was not precisely accurate, but no one contradicted her. The old woman had shown Emma genuine warmth, even if she had arrived at it through a process that included significant early judgment, and perhaps that was enough. Amora, the serious girl with the examiner's questions, told her friends that Emma had proved the theory she had been developing. I told you, she said, with 10-year-old certainty, that some people here are not what they seem. David went to school on the Tuesday after Emma left and taught his literature class with the same patient, attentive focus he brought to everything. His students noticed nothing different about him. He was simply their teacher, present, thoughtful, asking the questions that forced them to think rather than the questions that allowed them to recite. But in the evenings, he went to the communal farm and tended the rows that Emma had left. The tomatoes were coming up beautifully. She came back on Thursday, as she had said she would. She came back in the same simple clothes, the same one canvas bag, no convoy this time, just a car that dropped her at the edge of the village and drove away. She walked in on foot, the way she had arrived 3 months earlier, through the narrow road lined with cassava farms and morning wood smoke. The village noticed her, but differently now. The watching was different. The quality of it had changed from assessment to something more like recognition. Emma did not stop to perform. She walked to her little house, which someone had quietly ensured was in better condition than she had left it, fresh touching on the part of the roof that had been weakest, the broken step repaired. She noted this without question. In a village where someone cared enough to do this quietly and without announcement, the gesture was its own kind of communication. She set her bag down. She changed into her work clothes. She went to the farm. David was already there. He looked up when she came to her row. He looked at her for a moment, taking in the fact of her, perhaps, that she had come back when she had said she would, which was its own kind of statement. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she confirmed. She picked up the hoe she had left leaning against the fence post, and she began to work her rows. For a while they worked in their familiar silence. The morning was cool and the sky was the particular shade of blue that only exists in the first hour after full sunrise, before the heat begins to build. How was the board meeting? He asked, after some time. Long, she said. Productive. Complicated in the way that things are when you've been absent for 3 months and everyone has been making decisions in your name. Did they make good decisions? Some, she said. Better than I expected, honestly. Adis is, she paused. Adis is remarkable. Tell her I said so. Emma looked at him. He was smiling slightly, not performing the smile, just allowing it. I will, she said. The morning opened around them, unhurried, full of the ordinary sounds of a village coming awake, a rooster somewhere, children being called for breakfast, the distant clatter of pots, a radio somewhere playing music that floated across the field and mixed with birdsong. Emma dug her rose and thought about all the mornings she had spent in offices and boardrooms and cars, and how none of them had ever felt quite like this, like being fully in a moment without any part of herself standing outside it, calculating, managing, assessing. "David," she said. What do you want? From life. Not what you have, not what you've chosen. What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment. She had learned that his silences were not evasions. They were the time he took to answer honestly rather than quickly. "I want to be present," he said. "To the things that matter. To teach children who need to be taught. To grow things." He paused. "To know someone who is real." Emma kept her eyes on her row. "Real," she said. "Not performed," he said. "Not arranged. Someone whose face is the same whether they think they are being watched or not." She absorbed this. "You saw me covered in mud arguing with soil," she said. "Failing at farm rotations. Being mocked in front of the whole village. Being wrong about okra drainage." "Yes," he said simply. "And?" He stopped walking. He turned and looked at her directly, the way he rarely did, with an attention that was undefended and unambiguous. "And that is what I saw," he said. "Someone real." The morning held them both in its quiet, and in the distance, a child called out to another child, and somewhere a door opened and closed, and the fields moved slightly in a small wind. Emma nodded. Just once. Slowly. And she went back to her row, and he went back to his, and the morning continued its unhurried way around them, and everything that needed to be understood was understood. The story of Emma Osei and Okofo village would be told for years in that place. It would change in the telling, as stories do, certain details sharpened for drama, others softened for sentiment. But at its center, the story kept its truth intact, because the truth of it was simple enough to survive any embellishment. A woman chose to be nobody. She chose it deliberately, out of the accumulated hunger of a person who had everything except the one thing that cannot be bought or negotiated. She walked into a place where her name meant nothing and her money was invisible, and she let people be exactly what they were, which meant some of them were small, and some of them were calculating, and some of them were cruel in the easy, thoughtless way that people are when they believe they are not being observed by anyone who matters. And one of them was simply good. Not perfectly good. Not dramatically good. Not good in the way of stories where a character's goodness is announced with music and soft light. Good in the small, daily way, the correction offered without condescension, the silence that did not demand feeling, the defense mounted not for performance but because something in him could not stand to watch a person be diminished for entertainment. Emma had been looking for that. She had been looking for the knowledge that it existed, that somewhere in the enormous, transactional, performance-driven world, there was still a person who looked at another person and saw a person. She found it in the mud, in the early mornings, in the plain arithmetic of seeds and soil and patient, consistent presence. Wealth is not the enemy of love. The story of Emma Osei does not say that. But it says this: when wealth becomes the first language spoken in every room you enter, you eventually forget what it sounds like when someone speaks to you without it. Emma had forgotten. She needed to remember. And David, quiet, farming in the mornings, teaching because a boy in the third row needed someone. David did not love her because of her billions. He was consistent and present and careful and kind when he thought she had nothing. That consistency is the most important currency any of us can offer another person. It is the one that cannot be inflated, cannot be transferred, and cannot be faked indefinitely. The mocking men in white shirts, they teach us something too. They teach us that judgment is the refuge of the incurious. That people who mock others do so because looking at someone else's difficulty is easier than looking at their own. Chukwudi's laughter was never really about Emma. It was about the part of himself that did not know what to do with someone who refused to react the way he expected. When Emma finally walked past his apology, what she walked past was not a man, exactly, it was a mirror that had been showing him something he wasn't ready to see. And Mama Chidinma, who judged and then gave bean cake, she teaches us that people can move. That the woman who squints at a stranger in suspicion can, given enough time and proximity and honesty, become the woman who presses food into that stranger's hands with gruff affection. Humans are not static. We are, at our best, capable of revision. Emma went back to her ward. She went back to her board meetings and her empire and the endless complexity of the life she had built. But she went back differently. She went back knowing that the wall had a door, and that the door had been opened not by someone who knew what was on the other side, but by someone who had simply treated her well when there appeared to be nothing to gain from it. She came back to Okofo village on Thursdays. The okra continued to grow. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. If this moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something you had forgotten, then it did what it was meant to do. Real love exists. Quiet goodness exists. And the most extraordinary things sometimes arrive covered in mud, carrying a canvas bag, asking for nothing but the chance to be seen. Tell us in the comments, what part of this story stayed with you? What did Emma's journey make you feel? And if you believe that true love is still possible, that people can still be seen before they are judged, let us know below. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, not for us, but for yourself. Because the next story is already waiting, and it will find you exactly where you need it. We'll see you in the next one.